Hey everyone, welcome to episode 5 of the Code and Pixel podcast. Today we'll be talking about design education and inclusiveness. I'm joined by my co-hosts Kelly and Sameera. How y'all doing today?
I'm pretty good. How are y'all doing?
Doing pretty well. I think since the last episode, I started a new job at the same company. I'm still into it. I am now a software engineer on the consumer group design system team. So super excited, and it's a pretty big news in my life so far.
That's awesome.
Cool. How's it been so far? Is it exciting, stressful, all the above?
Definitely more engineering. I think there were lots of questions when I moved over to software engineering. Are you still a UX engineer? Happy to say the knowledge didn't just completely vanish when I transferred over, so that's still good.
Cool, that's nice. Yeah, since the last episode, I just been traveling a lot, so I've been to I was in California for 3 times. I was in Barbados. Yeah, I was pretty much living my best life, and it was pretty good. So, no complaints from my end.
Nice. I want to go to all those places. That sounds great.
Cool. Samira, thanks for joining us on this episode. Can you tell us a little bit about yourself and about Netlify and your role there?
Sure. Yeah. Hi, my name is Sameera Kapila. I am a senior product designer at Netlify. I'm answering all of these in the wrong order. I'm based in Austin, Texas, which is why that y'all came out right when you said hello. I've been at Netlify for about 5 months as a senior product designer, and Netlify does a lot of awesome things. But one of my favorite things is that we make building for the web a lot faster. So there are a lot of pre and post build plugins and integrations that you can work with. There are branch deploys and collaborative deploys that you can comment on with screenshots. There's a lot of great templates with Next.js and Astro and a ton of others that 11D, which I use on my own website along with Netlify. So it just makes getting what you need to get done a lot quicker and setting up a lot faster.
Awesome. Yeah, I'd love to hear more. You said 11e and Netlify. Can you talk a little bit about using that combination?
Yeah, I personally use it on my site. I've been wanting to do the switch into 11D for a couple of years now. Just following a lot of the 11D community over the years. They seem really awesome. I've been able to ask a lot of questions. My site was previously running off of Jekyll, and then using the GitHub pages side of things, lots of Ruby, lots of Liquid. I really liked the Liquid part, but I also could have used a faster build. And that was one of the many reasons that I wanted to move over. The other part was that I was using Netlify, and it takes a lot more to set up Jekyll just because it's with GitHub pages. There's a lot of work that needs to make Jekyll work, while a lot of amazing templates by Netlify basically have a deploy to Netlify, creates the repo, gets you up and running, you have npm start, and you're ready. So I went through that whole process. The whole process was more of the moving things from Jekyll. The easy part was using Netlify to set everything up. And I've been using that again for a couple of years. And then there was a role that was open, and I was like, I want to look into this. And it's been a really cool 5 months. I feel like I'm learning even more about all of the amazing things that are there. One of the things that for me, just again, like updating my personal site, one of the things I've really loved using is branch or like feature deploys. And in the past, that was I need to have Heroku, or I need to run it locally and then push to production and hope for the best. And now I get to do that, and it's so easy to share with a few designers I work with once a month, just on like weekend projects, to just be like, look at my deploy preview. Does everything look good there? And it's coming in from the design side, that has just been so easy to set up because it comes with every repo or every site that you build.
I bet that sounds way more automated and easier
Mm-hmm.
to have, easier to publish changes, and especially the branch feature you
Yeah.
talked about. Big fan of that. I love using Netlify. And yeah, can you briefly walk us through your career and any different roles you've had in the past?
Sure. Yeah, I can start from the very beginning on this year. No, I won't go that far, but I studied graphic design in undergrad and immediately went into advertising. and did that for a little bit. Had sort of two main clients, like a hotel chain and an NBA team. And I liked the hotel chain because it was in the Caribbean and I'm from the Caribbean. And I love the NBA because that's what I grew up watching with my dad and my sister. So I was like, this is the perfect place for me. And really enjoyed that for a while. Lots of good um, learnings about like client communication and understanding and just like deliverables, promises that we make, like this is a job we're going to do for a client. Are we delivering on that? Learning about timelines, all of that good stuff. Decided to apply to grad school because this was around some of the Mad Men era, the following of everything that Pentagram does, and that the evolution is to go to be an art director. And I applied to a ton of schools in Florida where I was at the time, and applied to a school in Texas because it just happened to be a program my sister was somewhat familiar with through her grad program that she had taken an elective in, and applied. Ended up getting a call from the school director saying, not only do we want to accept you, do you want to teach? And I said, oh, it's not for me. My mom did that. I don't know if I want to be in front of the classroom. And this is really funny coming from me as a kid because I would tell both my parents, one who was an engineer, the other who was a teacher, I never want to be in front of the computer and I never want to be a teacher. To then accept this grad school like program to teach because they were giving me in-state tuition, and that was a, if you teach we'll give you in-state tuition, went and did grad school in this area and completely decided to not move into the art director side of it. Just went full into the education side and really seeing that there's a lot more there that we can talk about. So the teaching side really, while it started from getting in-state tuition for the first time in my life because I didn't grow up in the US, ended up being something that I really enjoyed. And it, going back to what was so funny with my conversation with my parents, was I didn't want to be in front of the computer and I didn't want to teach, and here I was teaching people how to design while being in front of the computer. So they get the last laugh on that, and we joke about that still. Being at the university, I did that while I was still getting my master's, and then once I graduated, I moved to full time, thinking I would go down the tenure track professor route, and that's not always is not always an inclusive place, and there were lots of different things involved with politics, and is the web something that should be in design, which was something I tackled the entire time of where does web design fit in to a design program. And I know the journalism programs and computer science programs struggled with the same thing. Everybody had classes on it, but it was never like a focus area. Um, so I met a friend through a lot of meetups that were happening in town. They were from Columbia, South Carolina, and they said, I know of a code school that could probably learn from you and learn a lot about curriculum. I had also created the first university course about responsive web design, so there was a lot of conversations happening around how do you teach immersive technology when universities don't update their curriculum quickly? And then you have code schools that are able to update very quickly because they don't go through the same review cycles that university programs do, that are usually tied to state levels. These are tied to the state, but through workforce commissions and things like that. So I took that call, that introduction, and very quickly joined a code school called the Iron Yard. Initially started just observing a front end class and building a design class off of that. And it was a designers who code type of class that covered visual design basics and then went right into HTML, CSS, some JavaScript, and a whole lot of that way they could collaborate and pair with other students since we had concurrent front end and back end classes going on, so they could be in a group project with those team members and say, you've got front end, you've got back end, we've got design, and we're also committing our CSS so that you can build components off of that. And that did that for a couple of years, and not slowly, very quickly moved from teaching a course to overseeing the curriculum for the course to managing other instructors. And about 5 years in, I was hiring for 40 instructors while directly managing 40 instructors with no middle managers. And we had to, at that point, fix it because there's just not enough time in the day to hire 40 people while you're managing 40. And so moved into the executive team and really stopped designing in all entirety. Stepped away from code for a little bit too, just to manage and people manage and do all of that other stuff. Ended up working, I know this is a very long answer, working with the Obama administration and the Tech Hire Initiative on a diversity scholarship that brought more Latin, Latinx designers and developers into tech by giving them full ride seats into programs. And that was a collaboration with other code schools. And then we were sold by our parent company, and they took our parent company was sold to, and the parent company was kept, and we were told that we had about 7 months to close everything down and honor the existing classes that were enrolled. And that was really difficult, but in itself an adventure and lots of learnings there. Finally moved back, took a couple months off, and decided to actually be a individual contributor again and moved back into design. So I was at Thoughtbot, which is a consultancy that is well known in the Ruby community, in the open source community, and did a lot of design, Ruby, and designing for mobile apps, and learning a little bit of Xcode and Android Studio before joining Netlify. Whew. Okay, that was a lot.
That's awesome. Thanks for giving me like the overview of your career, because I think it's always interesting to see like how people progress from like their start from their career all the way to like where they're at now. And I think you had a vast different experiences between being an IC, being a manager, and also doing design education. I want to dive into that because I'm not gonna lie, I studied design also in school. I wouldn't say it was the best curriculum because I felt like I was underprepared once I got out of school, because it was like you spend like weeks building like one poster, where in the real world it's probably going to be shorter. Yeah, I wonder, like, from your point of view, what are some of the biggest pain points you saw, like when you were like teaching, and what are some of the things, like if you had a magic wand and you wanted to create your own school, what are some of the things you would like include?
I think one of the biggest pain points is politics, and I don't think that's easy to fix. I think it's less about individual people. I think it's more of the systemic issues around academia and how we build the tenure review process. That could be a podcast in its own, of just there are issues with the tenure track process and the way that people are expected, different instructors are expected to reach a certain level without a lot of tools to help get them there, or have equity within what they are able to offer or what they're able to include in their research. And a lot of research ends up being owned by the university too, which I think can stop it from really growing organically with the industry's help. That part aside, from more of a curriculum perspective, I mentioned earlier that a lot of universities, especially state universities that are public, have to go through some review process, whether it's with the department, whether it's with the Board of Regents, the president of the university, and then go to the state level. By the time something goes through review, if the school opts in to even go through a curriculum review process, that stuff, especially like web stuff, is outdated. And so that's one issue. The other part is there is a disconnect between what the industry is doing and what schools are doing, and there isn't enough of a bridge in between them of preparing students for what they need to know. And that was very clear in the teaching time. And one of the things that I did then was go to meetups and be that active instructor to go and say, hey, you're an agency here in Austin. Can you look at this curriculum? And those conversations went from just HTML as a default class and then the Flash class that I know a lot of universities had, to moving into, oh my goodness, there's this new thing called responsive web design. It looks like it's going to be around for a while. I think we were right on that estimate or that hypothesis. And can we include this and replace the Flash class with more advanced topics within the web, including and not limited to responsive web design, planning for the future in case there were ever changes in the industry trends. So all that to be said, there are some disconnects between the universities and employers that needs to be bridged, and that they both need to be included in each other's spaces to learn what's up and coming. And then curriculum needs to be updated regularly, not just at this is what the professors know and that's all we can teach. Professors also need to stay up to date on their stuff. Spicy takes.
No, it's interesting. Follow-up question, like how long would it be the process? I am a public university. I'm doing UX design. I have a UX design course. I want to update that. What is the like timeline from that, from like proposing to actually implementing that into the school?
Can be anywhere from 1 to 10 years,
Oh
to
my
be
God.
completely honest. It really depends on a lot of the politics at play, not just in the university, but at the state level and how often they review curriculum. So that can vary across the board. I think with the responsive web design course, we got really lucky because I was already going to meetups, already seeing that there was an issue. And I was asked, do you have any ideas of what to do with a splash class? And so myself and my coworker Grayson just worked our butt off to write and update 3 interactive media courses to then be the intro to HTML and CSS, the advanced topics that include CMSs, WordPress, and responsive web design, and then a third course, which he really managed, which was mobile design. And we rewrote that in a summer and got it approved very quickly. But that also means that it's approved that summer and it starts in the catalog for students starting that fall, not necessarily for the ones that are already in class. So there's a whole other part there, just like how do you get it into those earlier years? Do you offer it as a elective? So a whole bunch of Tetris pieces and chess pieces have to move around a board for this stuff to work. I'm mixing video games and board games together because that's how it felt at the time.
Oh my God. Yeah, that seems very stressful, but I think it's super important, especially for up and coming designers and front end folks. Yeah, that's awesome. Thanks for going through that.
Sure. It is I will say it is a little bit different in the code school world, and depending on what state you're operating in, they look at you differently. So in the state of Arizona, I had to go sit in a basement room of City Hall and wait for a whole day of businesses speaking about their right to register and operate as a business, and they were all in the education space. So one was a yoga studio, one was a unmanned drone training facility, and then us. And there's just huge variety. And I happen to be reviewed by one of the people who's on this review board who is a backend developer. So they were poking at curriculum, which didn't happen with the yoga studio, it didn't happen with the drone institute, but it just happened to be like this is the area they knew. Luckily, I was able to, I'd done my homework. I knew how to go before the panel. So they ended up approving us because I was able to answer a lot of those back end questions. In another state, I was asked to rename the courses titled front end and back end because it sounded like we taught people how to fix cars. And so there's just such a variety between how states manage this stuff. That recording was public because this is all like public state level stuff, and coworkers recorded my face when they asked that question. It could be a meme on its own. But while that's a lot quicker, there are huge discrepancies from a state to state level of what is allowed to be taught and what it can even be called, even if it's an industry standard.
Speaking of industry standards, something that you mentioned made me curious. You talked about teaching Git. And one of the things I find fascinating is I'll talk to a coworker and I'll be like, yeah, pull up terminal and I'm going through the motions and they're like, what do you mean? And it brought up a really good discussion on I just assume everyone's using terminal, but there are so many different ways to approach Git. So I'm just curious, what's the standard these days of how to teach people how Git works? I'm just curious.
It's been a while since I've taught people how to use Git, but it was very clear early on that the one option was not enough, especially to people that are coming in so new. Most code school students are career changers. Most university students are coming in straight out of high school, but in both scenarios, that's not always the case. Sometimes there's code school folks that did the front end course and now they're going back end. There's folks that have never finished their degree and are now coming back. It just varies, but I think it is important to show why I'm going to show it to you in the purest form was my mentality, is I want you to be able to write it at any point. And I showed students the GUI, but I wanted them to understand what it actually translated to. I think there's more conversations these days about like why learn CSS when you can just learn Tailwind. I think that's a whole other conversation. But I think understanding that the purity, I don't even want to say pure, I want to say vanilla is actually like writing the thing out just to help understand. Then if you want to use whatever tool you want, use that, but you should know what merge means in both capacities. It still does the same thing. It's just one's a button and one is a sentence.
Yeah, that's interesting. I also had a couple of colleagues in the past where they were like afraid of the terminal. And I was saying that it's probably better to go through that pain right now versus like later, because it's going to get harder. And also, like, some folks, and I think at that company where we couldn't even use GitHub, or we're like trying to use like some third, like, bootleg GitHub. So it was like in that case where we couldn't use like the GitHub GUI. I always tell people, start with the vanilla, and if you want to go crazy, you can always have like use the GUI or use Tailwind or all this other stuff. Cool. I want to kind of transition into your new book called Inclusive Design Communities. I feel like a host where I'm like, hey, here's this new book. Yeah, it's a pretty good book, and I would love to learn about your motivations of writing this book.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, first of all, thank you for getting the book. I appreciate that. There were a few motivations. I think one was I felt like I was talking about a lot of things that were in my head, that were observations that I made, but I hadn't put them down anywhere. I hadn't put them into blog posts. If I put them anywhere, they were ending up in conference talks that were like a one in, and I wanted something that could be there when there are all the time. I've wanted to say yes to help anyone out who wanted to talk about inclusion stuff, but there's also a boundary and timing stuff of I don't always have the capacity, and I'm not always ready to open something that is very emotional to me as a can of worms. And so I wanted something that could exist and I can say, I don't have the capacity as a human right now. I'm personally going through a lot. Can I give you this instead? Right? I never just want to say no. So that's a little bit of the people pleasing side. Another part of that, besides the people pleasing and not having written this down, was that I wanted to, in a way, visualize what I was seeing when I was zooming out. And what I mean by zooming out is I just gave you all the longest spiel of me being in advertising, traditional education, non-traditional education, IC, manager, being unemployed for a little bit and figuring out what do I want to do now that my entire company's been laid off. And that gave me a lot of time to think about how all these things were and weren't connecting. The same way that we talked about the student coming out of school and job disconnect, I noticed all over the place. And when we look at the chapters in this book, they start with the personal work and the society or meetups, and not meetups, but like society immediately around you. And it moves into education, moves into hiring, moves into retention, and then moves into conferences and meetups, because it's almost like a timeline of that very long-winded answer I gave y'all earlier.
Yeah, that's cool. And I think the one chapter I want to dive in deeper is the chapter title, like chapter 3, when you're talking about revisiting design education. And then, to quote, you said design education had focused on specifics of the software rather than how you think critically about my work. And then you later stated that it's essential that they be taught how to think critically in their design practice, like pondering the why versus like just understanding the how. Do you have a good understanding of like why education is done like this, and then like how we can improve it? Because I felt the same way when I was in school, where it was like, do it this way because it's always been like that. And I was like, all right, that makes sense. Mm-hmm. I feel like there's always a way to thinking about it and think about the why versus like the how.
I think a lot of times there are some of the issues like what we talked about earlier. There's you can learn how the language of Git works, or you can learn how to use Git Tower as a program. And while they can both help you achieve the same thing, the whys, I think, come from learning what the syntax means rather than what the button means. Because if you learn the syntax, you can use Git Tower, you can use another GUI and still understand what things do. I think that's why, interestingly enough, some of the Figma, Sketch, Illustrator, and other Adobe program stuff has been interesting to watch, because I think in a way Sketch paved the way for Figma from a tooling perspective. Figma adoption was easier because we knew how to use Sketch. Right. And I think there is something to be said there for sure that was helpful to us if we were those designers transitioning from one program to another. there were similarities. But at the end of the day, you still have to know how something like Pathfinder works so that you can do the minus front or merge. That's a horrible metaphor for understanding the functionality of a very small thing that has less to do with the program itself. You have to understand what intersect means. You have to understand what minus front, minus back means. It doesn't matter what program you're doing it in. I mean, it does when you actually do it, but you have to understand the concept of it before that.
I was gonna say, is it bad that I don't know what the icons mean for each of those and I have to click through
I
and
hover
find the
every
right?
time. Yeah, I still hover over them every time. Yeah, I think it's definitely okay. But it's knowing, like, you're still looking for the text. The icon may not be the right one because we're still like, wait, is the white the cutout or is the black the cutout? Like, that's more of a universal language difference between programs stuff. But we know what merge or intersect means and minus front as a concept means. Those titles are a lot more similar. So I know that's a horrible way to say, yeah, the software is good because it does explain those things, but it's going into the concept before the feature. And the same thing with Git, like understanding what merge or rebase mean before even typing them in helps us understand why we're rebasing with this branch in particular.
Or you just never rebase. And then you
Oh my God, you just said that. No,
Leslie, I love it.
but I think that's correct because even when I was like starting out, I never rebased, and I started doing it because people told me to do it. I didn't understand what was going on. I was like, hey, it works. And then I had an issue, and I was like, I didn't had no way to solve it. And I think someone explained it to me, and I think always starting with the why is super important because
Yep.
you really understand why you're doing this thing. And this could be like with work, but also like with anything else, where it's like you start with the why and then you go up to like understanding like how to implement it and what it is. So I think it's an effective like learning tool.
I think you touched on a very important point too, though. Like you said, that I did it this way because this is how people did it. And that is, at the end of the day, what a lot of this book comes down to is questioning the status quo. Like, why are we doing things the way that we do? Because even when I started teaching, oh, I'm supposed to cover Swiss typographic style because every typography class I've taken has covered Swiss typographic design. And we talk about Helvetica, and there's a movie about Helvetica, right? There's just, these are the things we're supposed to teach. And I think I talk about Comic Sans in the book as an example of we're supposed to hate it, and we completely disregard that there are thousands of reasons why it's okay to use in a lot of different contexts. Because we're just conditioned, we're brought into school, and with some of the grading things that are there, we're not learning the whys because we think if we follow the steps we're supposed to, we'll get an A. It's become about like following the steps and regurgitating something or copying what we learned. That's not critical thinking. That could be, sure, building a practice or getting like making something muscle memory, but critical thinking doesn't say follow these steps so you get an A in class. It's why are you doing things these way? Explain that and base your decisions off of that. So to go back to your original question a little bit, I think it's an issue in school because our structure of grade driven like work is the only thing that we're used to. We go into a university environment after being in an A through F school prospect or setup. And so that's why there's other models of education now that don't follow that don't make it about a grade, but make it about you effectively understood how to use this tool, not just copying and pasting and like using a rubric instead. Like there's so many education, full-time educators can dive deeper into this about critical thinking versus like grades as a thing to like dangle in front of people. I've left that world a little bit and there's a lot more there, but I think that to your point, like we're teaching this is how we're supposed to do stuff because that's how we did it, instead of asking students really the whys of why they do stuff and setting that. That was a ramble.
No, it's good. I think that's one of the reasons why I didn't really enjoy school, especially art school, because it was like, they were like, this is wrong. And I was like, why? And they were like, just because. Or they'd be like, in the past, they've done it this way. And I was like, what's the point? And I think even from my point of view, I did a lot of, being in New York, I was influenced by the style. And they were like, yeah, it's like very urban. I was like, Yeah. Is that a bad thing? Is it something that people have never seen before and they think it's like not good? But I think you nailed it where it's like if you talk about the why, like then it doesn't matter like the style. As long as it's communicating the message properly, that's like what all matters.
And it's diving into what does it mean to convey something properly? Like, does it mean that we're designing a poster that is visible across the street for someone? Does it mean that we're making it accessible? Does it mean that we are translating it? There's just that opens up a whole other thing, and I think that's a good thing to have those conversations and see where something could improve. I could ramble on about this for forever.
Let's say like someone wanted to get into design education. I think design education is like learning how to educate folks around design is super important. What is some advice you would give them?
I think something beautiful about design, especially those of us that are designing around and with the web, we're really lucky to work in the space that is also where things are evolving. If you look at 1994 web design and a list apart and what it was there as a forum to learn some of this stuff and where things are now, like we've grown and evolved with our environment. That's a very unique place to be. At the same time, I think there is an influx of so many different ways of doing things. And similar to the last topic that we talked about, I would encourage new designers as they're going through tutorials and things like that is know that it's just teaching you how to use the tool, not necessarily how to design. And that comes from practice in doing things. And you can still learn through those tutorials and, oh, this is cool. This doesn't mean it's the only way to do this thing, but it's an option. And then once you feel like you're comfortable with the tool, diving into those deeper, spicier hot takes that say, here's why you'd use grid or flexbox in a situation, or here's why we've moved away from the float rendered layout. Then you can get more into the whys. Sure, you can learn the foundation, but don't forget the whys and don't feel like the how-tos are prescriptive every single day in every single situation.
Cool. Love it. Is there anything you want to plug?
There's this book. It's called Inclusive Design Communities. I spent the last 2.5 years writing it. It is published under my dream publisher, A Book Apart. You can see a lot of their books right behind me, including mine. I had to add it the other day, just like one copy blooped in at the end. Definitely want to plug that. You can find it on abookapart.com. I'm also starting to share a lot of things we cut from the book, which was a whole other thing. Like, how do you include everything you want to include when the title has inclusive, but you also need to cut it down? So sharing a lot of thoughts and process about writing a book and what that was like, and also some of those like bloopers. I almost said bleepers. Blooper reels, but in writing form of things that we did include for now, or that may be in a future book. I don't know, but that's on samkapila.com.
Cool. And then you mentioned your website.
Samkapila.com is always a good place. And besides that, Twitter is the best place. SAMKAP, SamCap.
Love it. Sam, it's been a pleasure. Yeah, definitely check out the book if you haven't. And I really appreciate you coming on to the podcast.
Thank you for having me. And Adekunle, thank you for talking about this book with me in the very early days.
No problem. Just the background of me and Sameera have talked about this topics like this like for the past couple of years, and I'm super excited to see it come into life in the book. Hopefully everyone buys the book and learns a couple things about creating inclusive design communities. Have a good rest of your day.
Cool. You too. Thank you both. Have a good one.